today's review is talking about note names. We're going to review ledger lines. We're going to review treble, bass clef, and we're going to talk about accidentals. Should all be stuff we know already. Of course, we can't get into that without talking first about the musical alphabet. So for a quick review, that's our letters A through G. We notice after the letter G, what happens? Well, it doesn't go on to the letter H. It repeats, it starts back at A. We can infinitely go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Just like before that, it was A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Think about a piano, how we see those repeating sets of keys. This is the same kind of concept, right? Musical pitches are all going to be named using alphabet letters A through G. Now, one of the ways that we actually break that down is looking at a treble clef. A treble clef has to do with higher instruments usually, and it starts with the bottom line of our staff is E. Just so we remember, a staff is the 5 lines that we put our music on. It helps us organize and read our pitches. Our question comes, what happens if we need more space than that? And that's where we get into the realm of what we call ledger lines. So what ledger lines actually help us do is extend our staff, right? We know that we have 5 lines on our staff, but we have way more notes than our 5 lines and 4 spaces, pardon me. So how do we get those further ranges? Well, we use something called ledger lines. And in order to understand ledger lines, we have to first understand what's going on in the staff. So to read a staff, notes fall either on a line, where they go through it and it like crosses through the line, or they fall in what we call a space, which means they're kind of like sandwiched between 2 lines. When we're going to read the treble clef, we said, okay, our bottom line starts on E. So if we look at all of our notes that cross through a line to start, we have E, G, B, D, and F. Sometimes we say every good boy does fine. Sometimes we say every good boy deserves fudge. Sometimes we say empty garbage before dad flips. Sometimes we say every gorgeous babe deserves flowers. Whichever one sticks with you. Then we have to look at spaces, notes between lines, and those are pretty easy. They spell face. Now, here's where ledger lines come in. Ledger lines go infinitely beyond in both directions, and they are extensions of what we had. So if we went E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, when we go a space above that F and it's sitting on top of the line, now we're going to call that G. If we go above that, we have to add a line through it to extend our staff. We'll call that A, etc., etc. B, C, D. It could keep going. We just keep adding lines up above. Same thing going down below. We can add a note under our staff D and a note under that C, which a lot of us learn when we're first starting instruments or first starting to sing. And just like going the other way, it can keep going forever. So what happens if we play a low brass instrument, right? But I play trombone. I also play trombone. And we always hear about treble clef a lot. So we also have another clef called bass clef. Kind of looks like a sideways sad face. And we actually use that usually for lower voices, lower instruments, and lower actual like voices, or our left hand of our piano, or instruments like timpani, right? There's a ton of instruments that read this bass clef. And what changes is that our bottom line, instead of being E, is instead going to start with G. So it goes G, B, D, F, A. And there's some sayings for this too. We can do great big dragons fly around. The personal favorite that I like to use is good burritos don't fall apart. If you have another one, let me know in the comments below, because those are the only 2 that I can think of right now. And then when we look at the spaces, right, the notes that are sandwiched in between, we get A, C, E, and G. So I've heard all cars eat gas. I've heard all cows eat grass. And my personal one that I use with my burrito example is always carry extra guac for those burritos. So we have G through A, and of course we can expand our bass clef as well and use ledger lines there. So the note that comes after A would be B, the note that comes after B would be C, and we could add ledger lines, especially for a trombone player. We see this all the time. We could even go above that C, as you see here, and we could have the letter D, and so forth, right? Similarly, if we play an instrument like maybe tuba, for example, we would see notes going the opposite way. So the note before G, we have F, we would then have this low E, and we could even go down to the D before that if we wanted to. You notice how we just tack an extra line on there. So then we get into this thing called accidentals, and you're like, what the heck are those? Well, first we have to recognize the symbols. We've seen this guy before. It's a sharp, not a hashtag. Don't say it's a hashtag. And what that does is it raises a note by a half step. Now, that might be a lot of info for you if you've never heard somebody say that before. You're like, what the heck's a half step? What is all this? In basic terms, it sounds higher. Then we see this thing that looks like a little B. That is a flat. And basically, it's kind of like sharp's opposite, right? It basically lowers our note a half step, which again, you're like, wait, what? Makes our note sound a little bit lower. And then if we've changed our note for some reason, there is this wobbly square that we use, and that's going to reset our note back to what it should be. And so it's called a natural sign. I do call it kind of like a wobbly square, and it undoes an accidental. So if we had a note and we changed it to make it sharp, we now are going to change it back to make it what we call natural, where it's not changed by this. Same thing if it was flat and we use a natural, we can make it natural, not flat anymore. So here's a couple practice examples just to show you. See, on treble clef we have an F, and then we have an F that has a hashtag in front of it, and then we have an F that has a wobbly square in front of it, right? So here's our first F. When we make a change to it, right, this sharp sign that's going to be in front of it is modifying that F. It's changing that F, and it's going to change that F into what we call F sharp, and I'm writing it out for words, but we call F sharp. Now let's say we wanted to change it back to the F that we had in the beginning, we would have to put a little natural sign next to it, and then it would go back to being F natural. Now, if we take a look, the first guy we just called F, and the second one we're calling F natural, those are both F natural. Okay, they're the same note, actually. We changed it. If we were a trumpet player, we go like this was F, we switched to F sharp being our middle valve, and then we go back to F natural being first one. The only reason I'm saying natural after it is because we changed it to F sharp. So if we look at the bass clef now example, right, so normally bass clef out, we're looking at a B. And we're going to see a B, we're going to see that B get modified by a little b in front of it, right, like a lowercase b, and that's going to make it called B flat. And then let's say I want to go back to the natural, we're going to add that same wobbly square that we had, and now we're going to call it B natural, right? So the first B and the last B are actually the same note, like we said with the Fs. And we can apply this to literally any note ever, and we can change them. We can make them sharp, we can make them flat, we can make them natural. So now that you've got that down, that's all for now.